But in one way, you could call it the parable of the forgiving father. But as I begin, the question I have you ever been lost? Any of you ever been lost before? We've all been lost, haven't we? We find ourselves in so many ways feeling lost. I know I've found myself in, I remember last year when we were in Toronto, I felt lost in one of the malls because it was the Eaton Center, and it's huge, and it's big, and it's multi-levels, and Catherine says, I'm going here, and I'm thinking, where is that now? You know, she wanted to go to one of these stores, and, you know, I felt lost in malls before. I found myself exploring the woods, and got lost in the woods. I'm here to tell you that I got out, but I have been lost in the woods. I've been sitting in my chair in my office and felt lost sometimes. This past week, or I guess it wouldn't be this past week, but the week before when we were in Halifax, Tracy and I and Catherine and my mom, we went to the Nova Scotia Art Museum on Thursday night. And if you've ever drove in Halifax, it's a lot of one-way streets, and right now on Hollis Street there's a lot of construction. And so as I'm driving through Halifax, even though I know where I'm going, I'm feeling lost, especially when I was heading back to the bridge to get back to Dartmouth. Normally I go the old bridge, but the old bridge is, you know, that lift thing that they're doing, they're replacing. Anyway, I had to go to the new bridge, and that just messed me all up because I didn't know where I was going. You know, have you ever felt lost? This younger son, he felt lost in so many different ways. I remember hearing of two inexperienced hunters who had decided that they wanted to go hunting in the woods. And they talked to the game warden before they went into the woods, and he warned them that they might get lost. You know, the woods are thick, and he told them that if they got lost, just to fire 3 shots in the air, and that he would come along. But make sure that it's bang, bang, bang. And so, in due course, well, they got lost. And so, one said to the other, well, I guess we better fire our 3 shots. And so, they fired 3 shots. Nothing happened. After a while, the first hunter said to the second one, well, you better fire off 3 more shots. So, he fired off 3 more shots. They waited about an hour or so. Still nothing happened. Again, the first hunter turned to the second, and he said, man, I guess you better fire off 3 more shots. And the friend said, I can't. I've run out of arrows. They were lost, yeah, in many more ways than one. Well, this week we come to, I believe, one of the greatest parables that Jesus ever told. As I said, the parable of the lost son, as found in Luke 15. And we find the younger son of a Jewish man going to his father and demanding his inheritance while his father is still alive. It's kind of an unheard of thing. But a father could deal out his estate if he wanted to before he died. The only thing is that he would retire from managing his business and he would give it away to his children. And also, in Jewish law, a father couldn't give his property any way he willed. It was always distributed this way. The elder son always got 2/3 of the property, while the younger son would receive only 1/3. And so what he's asking his father for is, give me my 1/3 of your estate now. And so the father ends up giving this to him. He doesn't argue with his son. He just divides his wealth between the 2 sons, and he assumes that he's going to retire. And so the younger son, after it says a few days, he packed up all he had, and he leaves, and he takes off to a distant city. And when he's there, it almost seems like he loses control and wastes all his money on wild living. Today, sometimes this happens when young men and women leave and go to university. They feel the first, little bit of freedom, and that first year is a wash. I've seen it, and I'm sure you've seen it or heard about it yourself. And I'm sure we could fill our imaginations with all kinds of details as to what this younger son's wild living was. But the younger son is like many of us. We come to a point in our lives where we want to be free and we want to live as we please. We've grown up, we want to spread our wings, or we move out, go to school or go to work. But the younger son didn't leave to go to work. He had a small fortune, and he did not use it wisely. Rather, he used it up, and after he used it up, he hit rock bottom. Have you ever hit rock bottom before? Or have you ever felt in a spot where you are very low, where you're feeling like you don't know which way to look, you don't know which way to point yourself? We look in all kinds of different directions, but ultimately the direction we need to look in is up. We need to look to God. This young man, he hit rock bottom. He lost all his money. He was in need, and he went looking for a job. And in Luke 15, in the New Living Translation, verses 14 and 15, it says this. It says, about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land. Which means what? No rain, right? And not only was there no rain, when that happens, well, it's mostly farmers in that area or in that time. And so what happens to farmers? Well, they start to dry up too. They don't produce. Well, he began to starve, it says. And he persuaded. I love that word. He persuaded. That means that he had to go in and he had to beg for a job. And he begged, or he persuaded the local farmer to hire him. And the man sent him into the field to feed the pigs. Now, Jesus is a master storyteller. Because sometimes we might think, oh yeah, he's feeding the pigs. That's good. You know, pigs, we have pigs all over the place. You might even have a pig around your yard. We've heard of pigs out there before. I won't get into that. But this is a job that was forbidden. This was a job that was forbidden for a Jew because in the law, in Deuteronomy 14:8, it says this, and you may not eat the pig. It has split hooves, but does not eat the cud or chew the cud. So it is ceremonially unclean for you. You may not eat the meat of these animals or even touch their carcasses. So, what does that mean? Jews were to have nothing to do with pigs. No bacon. No bacon. That's a too bad thing. But if they did, it would make them unclean. And so the younger son sank to the point where he had to go into the fields to feed the pigs. And on top of that humiliation was the fact that he was still hungry. And he wanted to fill his body with the food that the pigs were eating. My uncle, he used to raise pigs. And I remember feeding them when I used to visit with him. And the stuff that he fed those pigs, it was not nice. It was nasty stuff. It wasn't like he was feeding them hay or feeding them, good stuff. It was nasty. And so if you think about that, here's a young man, he wants to fill his belly with some pretty nasty stuff because he has hit the bottom. He had it all. He had money to spare, but he blew it all. And now he was at the point where he wanted to eat the slop of the pigs, which was degrading beyond belief. Can you relate to the younger son? Have you ever found yourself, maybe not in that particular predicament, but maybe you found yourself in a low spot? We've all found ourselves in hard places and not sure if God really cares for us, or we may have felt that we've messed up so bad that God could never forgive me, that God would never give me a second chance. You see, it often takes hard times or sorrow or a tragedy to cause us to look to the only one who can help us, to look to God himself. A number of years ago, on February the 24th, 2001, there was a story that came out of Edmonton. A 1-year-old little girl named Erica had wandered out of her mother's bed and house and spent the entire night in an Edmonton winter. When her mother, Layla Norby, found out that she was missing, she went on a frantic search, and she found her outside in the snowbank. She appeared to be totally frozen. Her legs were stiff, her body was frozen. All signs of life appeared to be gone. However, Erica was taken to the Edmonton's Children's Hospital, and was treated there. And God helped the doctors and rescue workers to bring her back to life. To the amazement of everybody, there appeared to be no sign of brain damage, and doctors gave Erica a clear prognosis. And she'd be soon able to hop and skip and play just like the other kids her age. Well, some of us might be like that little girl, or the younger son. Maybe we've wandered away from our Father's house, from His care. Maybe we're not as close in our walk with Him. We found that we've drifted from His loving embrace. We're not where we want to be in our walk with Jesus. Or maybe our hearts have hardened, and our spiritual bodies may look as lifeless as this little girl in the snow. But I have some good news for you. Our Father has noticed that we are missing, that we have slipped away, and He's searching. He can take a lifeless spirit and restore health. We need to let our Father pick us up, take us back into His house. Look what it says in Luke 15, 17 to 19. It says, when he, that's the younger son, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants. Now you have to realize, hired servants aren't, they're the temporary workers. They're the ones that just come in for a season, for harvest or for sowing. And so they're at the bottom of the pile. They're not even the servants that have regular, pay and regular income. He's saying even the hired servants have food enough to spare. And here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I am no longer worthy of being called your son. This is a key statement. Please take me as a hired servant. So, he starts on his way home. And his plan is to plead. As he pled with this farmer to be able to be out in the fields with the pigs, he was going to plead with his dad to take him back. But not as a son, as a hired servant. In Luke 15:20 it says this, so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. I think to myself of maybe a farm in Saskatchewan where it's just flat and you can see forever. When I think of that long way off, he saw him a long way off coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Did you see that? The father was waiting. Not only was he waiting, he was watching the path, scanning the distance to see. If he had binoculars, I'm sure he'd be out there with binoculars, checking things out. And when he saw him, he didn't just wait for him to come, get down on his knees and beg him. No. Because, that son, he took half, the 1/3. No, he didn't. He ran to him. And you see, one thing that we all have is a free will. And we choose our own path. But God is always there. God's love, however, is patient. His love is constant. His love is waiting. He's searching for us, and he gives us opportunities to respond. But he will never force us to come back to him. He waits patiently for us to come to our senses. There was a New York State Justice by the name of Albert Tomei. He shares this story. He says, "A young defendant was convicted in my court of gunning down another person, execution style. The murderer had a bad record. He was no stranger to the system and only stared in anger as the jury returned its guilty verdict. The victim's family had attended every day for the 2-week trial. And on the day of sentencing, the victim's mother and grandmother were given the chance to address the court. And when they spoke, they didn't look to the jury, they didn't look to the judge, they looked directly to the murderer. And both the grandmother and the mother forgave him." And the grandmother said this, "You broke the golden rule, loving God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. You broke the law, loving your neighbor as yourself. I am your neighbor. So I have given you my address. If you want to write, I will write you back." I sat in this trial for 2 weeks, and for the last 16 months, I have tried to hate you because you took away my baby boy. But you know what? I couldn't hate you. The only thing I could feel was sorrow. Sorrow for you because you made a wrong choice. Judge Tomei writes, he says, "For the first time since the trial began, this defendant's eyes had lost their laser force and appeared to surrender to a life force that only a mother can generate, nurturing, unconditional love." And after the grandmother finished, he said, "I looked at the defendant. No more stare, no more laser focus. The destructive and evil forces within him had collapsed helplessly before this remarkable display of forgiveness." You see, the son, he's planning to go back and ask his father to be a hired servant. But he never has the chance. The father says in Luke 15:22, "But his father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet.'" You have to realize this is huge. Here's a dad who has been taken, and yet he restores his son. There's no, "Okay, I want you to, go out and spend your time in the fields, and I want you to make up for it. I want you to give me back." None of that. He restores his son. The robe, it stands for honor. It's not just, a bathrobe that he had in his bathroom. Yeah, give him a robe. No. He gives him one of the finest robes. And the ring, it stands for authority. If a man gives another his signet ring, well, that's the same as giving him the power of attorney. He then has full rights and privileges. And as I shared with the children, the shoes stand for the fact that he was a son, not a slave. Because children of the family had shoes, but slaves went barefoot. And then on top of that, he gives him a feast. For this son who was lost is now found. This parable, as I've said, could be renamed the parable of the forgiving father, because it really tells us about the father's love, acceptance, and forgiveness, not about the son's sin. It just said that he squandered everything. It doesn't go into the details. You see, the father's waiting. He's watching for his son to come home. And when he does, he's restored. He's forgiven. No guilt trip. And now you have to live. None of that. Now you're going to have to do this. Now you're going to have to do that. No, none of that. Once Abraham Lincoln was asked how he was going to treat the rebellious Southerners when they finally defeated the South and had to return to the Union of the United States. The questioner expected Lincoln would take a severe stance and be vengeful. But this is his answer. You have to listen to these words. I will treat them as if they had never been away. This is like the love of God and how he treats us when we turn back to him. We find unconditional love, acceptance, and forgiveness when we come back. Lincoln said, I will treat them as if they had never been away. Isn't that what the Father did? The Father restores him, lifts him up, puts him back where he was before. I have a question for you. Have you ever had to forgive somebody? Have you ever maybe kept your forgiveness from somebody? This father, I'm sure, would have felt betrayed and used, but that did not keep him from giving his son complete forgiveness. But within this story, we have two very different responses to this younger son's coming home. The father forgave because he was filled with love for his son, but the older son, well, he came in and he refused to forgive because he was bitter towards what the younger son had done. His bitterness made him just as lost to the Father's love as his younger brother had been. How easy is it to resent God's gracious forgiveness for others, whom we consider maybe to be far worse sinners than ourselves? But when our self-righteousness gets in the way of rejoicing when others come to Jesus, well, then we're no better off than the older son. The Father forgave. The Father restored. As I close this morning, I have a question for you. Do you need to ask for forgiveness from somebody? Or do you need to give forgiveness to somebody? This story that Lois shared about the forgiveness in these villages of Uganda, you know what they're forgiving? They're forgiving the murder of their families. Restoration. It happens, and it's desperately needed. Because who is it when we don't forgive? Who is it that's hurt? It's us, right? We need to be released of that burden. And the only way to release ourselves of that burden is to forgive. Let's pray together.